Time community, and welcome to the Wheel of Time Pod-Thru. I'm Teresa.
And I'm Tim.
And together, we're going to walk through Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time book series. How you doing, Tim?
I'm doing okay. A little tired, but I'm doing good. How about you?
I am thankful for coffee.
Coffee's good.
Before we get started, we just want to remind you that this is a reread. We assume that you've read the entire series, so there will be spoilers. You have been warned. All right, Tim, what are we going to be doing in today's episode?
Well, today we're going to be discussing chapters 24 and 25 of The Great Hunt, where we spend time in the White Tower with some new friends and finally get to Cairhien proper.
Woohoo!
Chapter 24 is called New Friends and Old Enemies, and the icon is the Flame of Tar-Valon.
Here's a quick summary to act as a reminder for those of you who are not reading along with us. It's Egwene's first day as a novice, and she's shown to her new room. She is surprised to find someone already waiting for her there. The girl introduces herself as Elaine and explains that new novices always have someone assigned to them for the first few days to show them the ropes and get acquainted with life in the tower. They complain about all the chores they have to do and compare what they are able to do with the power. Each girl is able to see the nimbus of light around the other Chandler for the first time. Elaine asks if she knows Rand, and Egwene realizes that he told her about meeting the daughter heir of Andor, but she hadn't believed him at the time. Elaine confirms that she is the daughter heir, but that she's not supposed to mention it or she'll end up in Sheriam's study. They talk about punishments and how hard the tower pushes novices, despite their dwindling numbers. Elaine brings up Rand again and says that Elida thinks he's special in some way, and was on a tear when he escaped Cairhien. Elaine says that there are two other girls there that know Rand, and she wants to introduce Eggs to one of them. Elaine says that one of them, a novice named Elsie Grinwell, will probably not last long in the tower, but the other one is cool. Egwene gets all jealous and huffy because Rand talked to girls that weren't her. On their way, they run into a gentled and greatly diminished Loghain. Eggs wonders if the men always have to be gentled or if they could find another way. And Elaine tells her that they tried for 300 years after the White Tower was built, but there was no other way to find. They make it to the garden where Min is sitting, and Eggs recognizes her as the girl in boy's clothing from the inn in Berlin. Min lets her know that Moraine sent enough money for Master Fitch to rebuild the inn bigger and better than before. Min asks after Rand, and Egwene ignores the question and instead asks her why she's even there if she has no interest in being Aes Sedai. Elaine explains that Min is there so that the Aes Sedai can study her visions. They both try to get Min to tell them about what she sees around them and are interrupted by two young men, Galad and Gawain, coming back from sword practice. Galad is so good looking that Eggs can hardly see straight. He asks to see her again and she agrees. Galad leaves and Eggs is informed that the two men are Elaine's brothers, though Elaine makes it obvious that she is not one of Galad's fans. Elaine tells Gawain that Egwene knows Rand, and Gawain tells her that he has talked to all sorts of people who've met Rand, and that their lives were changed because of it. Elida appears, and Gawain makes a quick escape before she can stop him. Elaine tries to introduce Elida to her new friends, but Elida chastises her for not understanding the difference between being the daughter heir talking to her mother's counselor and being a novice speaking to an Aes Sedai without being spoken to first. They hear the bell toll, and Elida tells the girls to run or they will be late. She tells Elaine to report to Sheriam's study after her chores. As the girls run, they both declare fiercely that they will be Aes Sedai one day. Elida questions Min ruthlessly about Moraine and Rand. Min manages to keep the lie up that she had never heard of Rand, but by the time Elida finally leaves her alone, she's drenched in sweat and cursing Moraine for bringing her to the tower. She laments that she does not want to fall in love with a farm boy that she's only met once, and wishes Moraine would hurry up and come out of wherever she's hiding so Min can finally get out of there.
Egwene's impression of Elaine's dignity and self-possession drives the point home that Elaine is a princess, or at least a highborn noble. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Like, someone has just entered the room, obviously of a much lower social class than her own, and she's trying to put Egwene at ease right from the start. Mm-hmm. She introduces herself by her first name and acknowledges that she not only knows Egwene's name, but where she's from. This is something someone in power does to communicate that they care enough about a person to have looked into them before they met. You could also choose to see it as a power play that some people use to assert their dominance in a conversation, but that's not what is going on here. Elaine has been assigned the task of orienting the new recruit, and like anyone who gets being a noble and what it's all about, she's embracing her role and looking after her charge. Some people are really quick to get down on Elaine for being stuck up and too full of herself, but considering the extreme amount of privilege that she grew up with, I think Elaine tries really hard to treat people with respect, as opposed to subjects that need to be ruled. And this introduction to her kind of highlights this really well.
Yeah, totally. I really agree with you that, like, a lot of people don't like Elaine because she's stuck up or whatever, but hello, she's a princess. Of course she's stuck up.
Yeah.
But actually, I don't think that she's stuck up. I just think that because she's a princess, she's often blinded by her privilege.
Yeah.
But she does her best to treat everybody that she meets with respect, regardless of where they come from. And if she does say something insensitive that she doesn't, she never means to, and she's quick to correct herself. Like when someone tells her, hey, that's not cool, she's sorry and she changes her behavior.
Yeah.
So I actually think Elaine is a great character.
I agree.
So I'm going to put it out here that I really do not like this chapter.
Okay.
It is full of lazy writing and stilted dialogue. And I'm not apologizing for calling it that. Like, sorry, Jordan fans, he's not perfect. But like coming off the previous chapter where Nynaeve's test was written so wonderfully and it was so compelling, going to this drivel is just, it's so disappointing.
Yeah.
And it's not because it's an info dumpy chapter. Like we saw 2 chapters ago when Moraine is at Adilius and Vandine's house. That was an info dumpy chapter, but it was still interesting and engaging. And you're never bored and you're trucking along with it.
Yeah.
Jordan has proven time and time again that he is better than this.
Yeah.
It's like he just phoned this one in. This is probably the worst dialogue in the entire 14-book series.
Okay.
Like, seriously, think of a worse scene or a worse chapter that has this terrible dialogue in it.
I'm kind of at a loss.
I'm really, it's like, were you napping? Like, what happened? And we've already mentioned that Jordan was not good at writing young women. And this chapter is probably the worst offender of that. For sure. No one talks like this, No one meets someone for the first time and then ends up hugging them 10 minutes later.
Yeah.
I love this series. And I know that, sometimes I complain about the uneven writing, but I do. I love this series. But Jordan can be really inconsistent. And I have to blame his editor for that. That's their job.
Yeah, it is.
What were they thinking letting this chapter pass through? Like, it needed a rewrite really badly.
Yeah, well, growing up watching TV shows that were targeted at younger audiences, but obviously written by professional writers who are well into their 30s and 40s, there's several times that you run across dialogue that does not make sense. Like, like how sometimes in 90210 or Fresh Prince of Bel-Air or a show like Full House, the word choices show that the writers were trying too hard to make scenes appear hip and cool, but they were too out of touch to get it to sound natural, like a conversation between 2 young people, for real. This chapter really feels that way to me, and as do a lot of interactions between Elaine and Egwene in the first couple of books. Yes, I know I just dated myself. Get off my lawn.
Yeah, it's not good.
While we're on the subject of cringeworthy dialogue, I find it funny that we go from, we're going to be friends, to, so have you met this guy I know? I almost hear a generation of feminists collectively sigh when I read this. Like, the 90s was a different time where the Bechdel test was not as much a part of mainstream conversation as it is today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do like that Egwene realizes that Rand had been telling her the truth all along when he said that he met the daughter heir of Andor. It's like, maybe you shouldn't have been such a bitch about it, huh, Eggs?
Well, maybe. Elaine's exposition about how the structure of the tower works makes me think forward to the future. The tower that Egwene brings to life basically breaks the whole age delineation. We see women of all ages putting their name in the novice book. She brings so much change that's good to the tower by the end of the series. I may not like her as a person, but she was the leader the tower needed for the last battle, and it all starts right here. Mm-hmm. She throws away the box that has allowed the White Tower to get to the point where there's only 40 novices, 7 of which are going to become accepted. Reading that number, knowing how many there are when the Saladar Aes Sedai get together in later books, just reinforces how Egwene was the right person at the right time, almost like the pattern intended it that way.
Yeah, almost.
Maybe. Maybe. We get the first mentions of the culling, and I kind of relate to Egwene's impatience when Elaine asks if she's familiar with the concept. I grew up in a small farm in an agricultural community, and I also respond with, doesn't everybody? But
No.
if there's one thing I've learned over several years of being married to a city person, it's that many of the experiences I take for granted are not common to people at all. Elaine does not mean to be condescending, but small town folk don't really take well to the city people lecturing them about things that are so central to their life. Even more so when the knowledge strictly comes from books and not from hands-on experience.
Yeah.
I also find it funny that Rand is one step short of a wanted fugitive in Andor.
Right?
He takes one journey with Tom and ends up catching the Eye of the Daughter Heir, almost getting put in prison, has an APB put out on him by the Aes Sedai advisor, who's totally pissed off because he skips town before they get to him. Tom taught him well.
Definitely. Egwene's true colors really show in this chapter as a self-absorbed brat. She's petty and jealous that Rand talked to other girls during his travels, thinking that he should wear ram's horns because he's as bad as a Trolloc. Later, she gets snippy with Min when Min asks about Rand. It's like, seriously, Eggs, you might want to dial it down a notch. I mean, I know that they assumed that they would marry one day, but their paths have obviously diverged, and he doesn't have her brand stamped on his ass, you know?
True. The encounter with Logan is a little unsettling.
Yeah.
Like, you mentioned something to me the other day, that it is really easy to forget in light of all the stuff that's happened and transpired in the story since. Logan is responsible for killing sisters. Surely they were trying to capture him and gentle him, but he's still responsible for the death of Aes Sedai. And now he gets to live out his life in contemplation in the tower as a prisoner. Awkward.
A little bit, yeah. I like that Jordan is already posing the question of if there's a better way other than gentling to deal with these men.
Yeah.
Balance is such a major theme throughout the series. And I like that he keeps reiterating that the greatest feats of the Age of Legends required men and women working together with the power.
Yes.
I mean, I realize that she's being motivated for her concern for Rand specifically and not all male channelers in general. But, like, it's weird how easily the Aes Sedai gentle men, considering how they feel about a woman being stilled or burned out.
Yeah.
It's like they've dehumanized male channelers so much that they can't see the parallels there.
Yeah, they bought into the monster, like the monster myth of the male channeler.
Yeah, and it's like, he's just like you. Maybe you want to think about that, you know, really think about that.
Yeah. It's good to see Min again. She is such a breath of fresh air. And it's kind of comical to see how territorial Egwene is, especially when you consider that both Elaine and Min end up with Rand, while her road runs in a different direction. I like the line, and for an instant, Egwene thought she saw sadness or regret in her eyes. It has to suck to know people's future, but also know that revealing that future can actually make things worse.
Yeah, and it must totally suck that everyone's constantly asking you about it. You know?
Yeah.
And, you know, it's like Egwene and Elaine are both trying to get her to say more about what she sees. And it's like, that's great if she sees that someone's going to become a king or someone's going to marry and have 50 children, you know, whatever. But, like, if she sees a horrible, bloody, painful death, like, that's not something you want to tell someone. And it sucks to be constantly pestered, you know?
Yeah, it does.
Like, I really enjoy Min's character, but it's a really complicated character.
Yet another talent that I wouldn't want to have myself.
No, thank you. Nope. No way. So the one good bit of dialogue in this entire chapter is the banter back and forth between Min and Elaine.
Yes.
The teasing feels natural, and it's great shorthand to communicate like their friendship.
Yeah.
You know? Jordan didn't seem to have as much trouble writing Min as he did the other girls.
Yeah. Huh.
It's as if when he was writing Egwene and Elaine, he got hung up on their femininity and thinking of them as young girls that he was at a loss. Huh. Whereas with Min, since she's androgynous or more masculine presenting, he had an easier time getting a handle on her. Like, he wrote Min the same way he writes the boys.
True.
But also mixed with a slightly older woman. Like, he can write women. Like, he writes Moraine. Mm-hmm. And he sort of goes back and forth, but he's better at writing Nynaeve because she's a little older. Yeah. And Min is the same age as Nynaeve. She's a little older.
True.
And not... we've mentioned this before, but it's like he bought into the concept of young girls being frivolous and flighty. And so he just didn't know what to do, it seems like.
Yeah. And, Min's seen a little bit more of the world.
Yeah.
So
she reads older.
Yeah.
And is in fact older. She's a few years older than Rand. So he did much better when it came to writing Min and Nynaeve because they're a little older. Mm-hmm. And later in the series, when Egwene and Elaine are out in the world and gain more experience and then can also be written older, much better. And like their conversations make sense all of a sudden. And the dialogue is natural. He's treating them like normal people instead of props. Okay. It's like, it's almost as if he got too much into his own head, into playing young girl stereotypes, and forgot that these are supposed to be real people, Yeah,
and we're kind of stuck with these younger versions of them for at least one more book, I think. But then it really starts to get much better.
Once they get to Tyr and beyond, everything's fine.
Yeah. It's
these first couple books when they're still in the tower, especially. But when they're still in the tower and they're on their first adventures, up until that point, when they're starting to grow up a little, but they're still very young and very green, he didn't know what to do with them. But he didn't have that problem with the boys, who are also very young and very green. It's like he was able to write the boys like real people, but I guess he just didn't have a lot of experience with younger girls. And so instead of writing them as real people, he played into stereotypes and made them silly and frivolous and stupid and completely unrealistic.
So, yeah. You really don't like this chapter?
I hate this chapter. Yeah. It just, he did not know how to write young women. He really didn't. And it is what it is. Like, I think Robert Jordan was an amazing writer. I think he was a wonderful writer. I think these books are fantastic. Even the ones that I'm not the biggest fan of. They're still very good books. But there are definitely scenes and chapters that are terrible. And this is one of them. My not so humble opinion.
Not so humble opinion. Okay. The vision that Min sees of the severed hand is interesting.
Yeah.
We don't see this come true until the end of Knife of Dreams. But Jordan put it all the way back here in The Great Hunt. I do find it odd that he chose to bring it up as something that Min saw from Elaine. Like, the part about sharing her future husband makes sense, but
right.
I'm not sure why he chose to bring the hand into the conversation.
Yeah, it's weird. I don't know if it definitely refers to Rand, because she wasn't even there when he lost his hand, and it wasn't actually severed.
Right.
I mean, it certainly could, but it might also refer to the band of the Red Hand.
Oh.
Because their symbol could look like a severed hand when seen out of context.
That would make much more sense.
But I'm not really sure. I mean, it could be that way back in book 2, Jordan meant to refer to Rand's hand, thinking it would have a bigger impact on Elaine, when he still thought the series would be shorter. But by the time he actually got to Knife of Dreams, the series had gotten away from him, and then it didn't make sense anymore. So, I mean, it's very, very possible that it referred to Rand's hand, but it might not have. Like, there are other possible explanations.
I like the explanation of the band. That makes a lot of sense to me.
I mean, that might be a little bit of retconning because we know what happens. But,
Could be.
I mean, because we know what happens, it does make sense. And visions are all hindsight anyway. Like, they're foresight, but they don't make sense until hindsight. So
Right.
that sentence made no sense.
Hey,
you know what I mean.
I know what you
Words,
mean.
whatever.
We're going to roll with it. Okay. Galad is frustrating. Mm-hmm. But the scene is sweet. He is chivalrous and proper and leaves Egwene a little bit twitterpated. Mm-hmm. And the fact that he's Rand's half-brother explains why he reminds Egwene of Rand.
Yeah. And if Galad is drop-dead gorgeous, that the women complain he's too pretty to be allowed, and they do often, then Rand has to be pretty good-looking too. Like, that explains a few things. I want to take a moment to relish this scene with Gawain while he's still a decent character before he becomes the epicenter of all things sucky and awful.
Oh, yeah, let's do this.
Because Gawain was cool for about 5 minutes. And then he was very, very, very not cool for the rest of the series.
Yeah.
So enjoy it while you can. And we get a perfectly succinct summation of tavern twisting from Gawain. Quote, "Such a strange fellow. A shepherd," he said, though he never looked or acted like any shepherd I ever saw. Strange. I've met all sorts of people, and they've met Rand al'Thor. Some do not even know his name, but the description could not be anyone else. And he shifted every one of their lives. There was an old farmer who came to Cairhien just to see Logain when Logain was brought through on his way here. Yet the farmer stayed to stand for Mother when the riot started, because of a young man off to see the world who made him think there was more to life than his farm, Rand al'Thor. You'd almost think he was Tavarin. Elida is certainly interested in him. I wonder if meeting him will shift our lives in the pattern. Yes, it will.
They will. The interaction with Elida kind of drives home how much of a mean-spirited person Elida is. Mm-hmm. Yes, she should have corrected Elaine for not adhering to proper decorum, but she did not need to send her to the Mistress of Novices to be beat for it.
Yeah.
Also, it kind of highlights how young Elaine is.
Yeah.
And we end this chapter with a brief point of view from Min, where we find out that she is falling in love with Rand. Visions are weird. Mm-hmm. She knows that she will love him and share him with 2 other women, but it must feel like she's trapped, not having a choice in the matter. Because she knows her visions always come true. I find that pretty horrible.
Oh, definitely. Definitely.
And that wraps up chapter 24. But before we get to chapter 25, here's a quick word from our sponsors.
Today's episode of the Wheel of Time Pod-Thru is brought to you by everyone's favorite teen drama, White Tower High. See schemes go awry, petty jealousies get blown way out of proportion, and young love bloom out in the practice yard. Get ready to be scandalized by who is walking with whom out in the garden, and why your favorite character is getting called to Sheriam study this time. With all the pranks, backbiting, gossip, and chores, who has time for lessons? White Tower High, premiering this summer.
Chapter 25 is called Cairhien, and the symbol is the rising sun of Cairhien.
Rand, Loyal, and Huron are escorted by the soldiers to Cairhien. The Foregate is the best Ren fair ever, and Rand is charmed by the colorful clothes and jovial festival spirit. Their party is halted by a parade of oversized puppets on stilts full of fantastical creatures, including a Trolloc, clearly created by someone who had never seen one and probably thought they were fiction. The soldiers are disgusted by the peasants who shouldn't even be there, and when Rand asks where they should be instead, Huron explains that the Ale War scared all the farmers off their farms, and they all fled to the Foregate. When the war was over, they were too afraid to go back, so now there are no outlying farms, and King Galdrian has to import barges of grain from Andor and Tyr to feed his people. To keep them quiet, the king hires gleemen and musicians to perform, and holds horse races and fireworks shows to keep the party going. The Illuminators even built a chapter house in Cairhien. When they get to the gatehouse, the officer gives their names to the gatekeepers to be written in a large ledger. Lord Rand of House Althor in Andor, and his man called Hurin, with Loyal, an Ogier of Setting Shangtai. Rand is told that he must return the next day to report what inn he is staying at. Rand isn't into the austere stuffiness of the city proper, and asks if they can recommend an inn in the foregate. The Cairhien are shocked, and Hurin frantically whispers that it would not be proper for a lord to stay in the foregate, and they'll think he's up to something. Rand says that he'll find an inn in the city, and asks after Selene, and the gatekeeper says that he'll make inquiries after her. Hurin leads them to an inn called the Defender of the Dragon Wall, and Rand is getting the distinct impression that looking like an ale is doing him no favors in Cairhien. They get settled with 2 adjoining rooms, and Rand immediately wants to go back to the foregate because all the calculating looks and formalities are getting to him. Loyal wants to hide in the inn and read because he's afraid of running into Ogier, who may know that he's a runaway, and the sniffer says that there's too much violence in the foregate and the place stinks. He does want a drink, though, so he accompanies Rand down to the common room, where the innkeeper presents Rand with 3 invitations from noble houses. Rand hurls them into the fire and announces to the common room that he has nothing to do with the game of houses. Hurin tells him that by doing so, he just convinced every person sitting there that he is deep in the game, and Rand angrily storms out of the inn toward the foregate. He wanders through the streets of the foregate, seeing magicians and gleemen, and generally enjoying himself. A voice catches his attention, telling the story of Rogosh Eagle-Eye. Rand follows the sound and finds none other than Tom Merrilin himself. Tom sees Rand and nods to him to meet him backstage. Rand is thrilled to see Tom alive and expresses guilt that he didn't go back for him in Whitebridge. Tom tells him that he made the right choice and that the Myrddraal had no interest in him. He left Tom with a bad leg, but went chasing after the boys pretty quickly. Tom asks if Moraine is with Rand, and when Rand says no, Tom figures it was Matt or Perrin she was after and doesn't want to know which. Instead, he wants his harp and his flute back, and Rand promises to bring them. Rand is bursting to tell Tom everything, but Tom has to get back on stage and tells Rand to meet him in an hour at the Bunch of Grapes, where he has a room, and not to forget his flute and harp.
The description of the foregate always reminds me of a Renaissance fair. Mm-hmm. Lots of people milling around, hawkers trying to get people into shops, and colors everywhere. And the buildings are kind of hobbled together and look a little dodgy. Just like every Ren fair I've ever been to. Yeah. Complete with music and parades through the streets. It's like a nonstop party.
Definitely. Hurin explains to Rand about the Ale War and how the farmers are still afraid to go back to their farms. And then he says, "Best not mention it to a Cairhien, though, my lord. They like to pretend the war never happened, or at least that they won it." So after living in North Carolina for 6 years, this reminds me of how some Southerners view the Civil War, or should I say the War of Northern Aggression.
Yeah.
It's interesting to hear some of them, not all, talk about their version of history that may or may not have any similarity with reality.
Yeah.
It's kind of messed up.
Yeah.
Again, not all. I'm not saying everybody's like
not
that,
everybody.
But certainly a lot.
Yeah, like the sign for the inn called the Defender of the Dragon Wall has a man with a sword pinning a red-haired man to the ground, holding them down with their foot on the chest. Mm-hmm. This is clearly a comment on the Ale War, trying to spin it like the strong Cairhien man made short work of the inferior ale.
Right.
We know that the only reason the ale did not destroy the city during the war is that they didn't even consider it a war.
Yeah.
They were simply tracking down Layman in order to make him pay for the insult of cutting down the tree. And they kicked every country's butt that got in their way.
Yeah.
Just another example of Cairhien prejudice and their superiority complex. The same prejudice is why everyone that they encounter is watching Rand. He looks like an ale.
Right. So, okay, here's a question. Is King Galdrian trying to bankrupt Cairhien? Because that's what he's doing.
Yeah.
His farmers aren't farming, so he's importing all the food, and then he's wasting all this other money on entertainment. Was he just completely blind to how money works, or was he actively trying to destroy the country?
You know, I want to say Tom asks the same question in the next couple chapters.
Does he? Okay.
I can't remember, but if Tom's asking that question too, then we know something's afoot.
Right. Because, I
But-
mean, you cannot exist if your country isn't producing its own food.
Yeah, like the main.
I'm shocked that he's been able to survive 20 years with this system. Because the Ale War was 20 years ago. So he's been importing food for all of his people for 20 years. How does Cairhien have any money?
Maybe there's something else going on. Maybe they're getting money from something else.
I mean, it's easy to blame Tom for the Civil War in Cairhien.
It is.
Because, assassinated king, stuff happens.
You cut the head off.
I mean, it seems like this was inevitable because if you purely just look at the food situation, forget all the money that he's wasting on entertainment, and just look at the food situation, there are no farmers farming. There is no resource being created in Cairhien. Like, his people are completely 100% dependent on foreign markets. Like, that's absolutely not sustainable. There's no way that he can keep that going. And he's already been doing it for 20 years. Like, it's...
Well, and at the same time, he's motivating the farmers to stay in the foregate by paying them to have parties all the time, basically financing the entertainment.
Right.
While the nobles and all the proper people stay inside the city. And once they catch wind that the reason they don't have food to eat on their nice, nobility lifestyle, once the food runs out, they're going to blame the farmers for being lazy and sticking around, not doing their job, right?
Right, and it's creating a further divide between the classes.
He's driving that wedge even further. And why? Is a good question.
I don't know. I really want to know, was this by design or is he completely incompetent? Because, I mean, it's entirely possible he's completely incompetent. But,
Happens.
I mean, I can't remember if he was a dark friend. I know Barthanes is. Was Galdrin also a dark friend? And is ruining the country on purpose?
No, I don't think so. He might
He was just completely incompetent?
completely incompetent. Which is,
I mean, that happens more often than not. But,
when you inherit your title from your dad or your mom,
I think
and
it was
you
his
don't really earn
uncle. Wasn't Layman his uncle?
You're right. Layman's uncle.
Or cousin or something? I don't remember. I really don't remember.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's no way that this system is sustainable. So, I mean, yeah. Okay, anyway, weird economic conversation.
Yeah, sorry about that. So Loyal makes a comment that no Ogier could like working here. The Cairhien want what they want without embellishment. It says a lot about the conservative and almost puritanical nature of the Cairhien culture. Except when there's a festival and they all go crazy for that. But we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
Things are basic with straight lines and not embellished at all. It's similar to the Borderlands where things are all about utility and time is not wasted on embellishment. But with the Cairhien, it's more taking propriety to its most ridiculous extreme.
Yeah.
This is highlighted by the reaction that the officers have when Rand asks if can recommend an inn for him back in the foregate instead of the proper city. They're scandalized, and I'm just not the biggest fan of Cairhien culture.
Yeah, because, I mean, it's not the same as the Borderlands. Like, the Cairhien are actually very into their comforts and lavish. You know?
They're lavish.
But they're also so hung up on appearances and propriety and to the point of, like you were saying, ridiculousness. Like, it doesn't even make sense anymore. So they have all these straight lines and rigid. They take rigidity to its extreme, you know? It's a very strange culture. Huron is continuing to treat Rand as a lord and is dialing it up more and more. He asks Rand permission to go down to the con room for a drink and is practically bowing. More importantly, he's doing that thing that trusted servants do where they watch over their lords and make sure that they don't do anything where they might lose face. He's trying to protect Rand's appearance and reputation by advising him of the Cairhien ways.
Because Cairhien's a good guy.
Totally.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Cairhien's a great guy. And if he was Rand's manservant, he'd be a great one. But he's not. He's just a guy. And Rand's like, I'm also just a guy. Like, let's not forget that part.
I 100% admit that I am projecting my own baggage here. But I hate petty politics. Mm-hmm. Some things matter. Is a political person possibly colluding with a foreign power? Did a government pull off a hit on a journalist on soil of another country? These are big things that, true or not, I find interesting. But not this stuff. This stuff is just lame. Some no-name lord shows up in the Capitol and everyone loses their mind over the implication. Like, Rand is upstairs in the inn for maybe 15 minutes, and there are 3 invitations from noble houses waiting for him when he gets back. I mean, isn't there a better use of time and resources? This is why I could never be a politician. Like,
This is why?
Well, this is one of many reasons why I could never be a politician. But I really can't stand the petty crap you have to do to keep up with the long game schemes other politicians have in play, which is why I applaud every time I read this section where Rand just throws the invitations in the fire.
Absolutely. I love that Rand has this sweeping declaration that he has nothing to do with the Game of Houses. And Cairhien is all like, well, now you've done it. You've just convinced the whole room that you're in so deep they'll have to get to the bottom of it. Poor Rand. Like, this trip to Cairhien is such a comedy of errors. I love it.
Yeah. Oh, the description of the theater that Rand encounters back in Foregate, it reminds me of the Globe Theater, or, well, at least pictures I've seen of it. It's not important. It's just kind of cool nod to history.
Which one is the Globe Theater?
Shakespeare's Globe Theater in England.
Oh, okay. Huh.
I cannot express how happy I am to see Tom.
Yes.
He is such a balance to the crazy changes going on in Rand's life. And he brings a level of calm and sanity that keeps Rand in check. And he does it without bullying him, unlike other people I could mention.
That's so interesting because he actually spends so little time with Rand.
Yeah, but that little bit of time that he spends with him when he's not seen
makes a big difference.
Like, he is behind the scenes doing all kinds of random shadowy, like, Game of Houses crap that Rand never knows or never sees, and we don't even see some of it.
Tom is the puppet master.
But Tom back in Rand's sphere brings that level of calm. He doesn't have to have a lot of interactions. He just has to be around Rand, and everything gets better.
Right. But it is interesting. I mean, Tom is a huge influence on Rand.
Oh, yeah.
But he is in his life so little. You know, like in Eye of the World, we lost him in Whitebridge.
True.
And then here, we only have Tom in Rand's life for like 2 chapters. Mm-hmm.
And stuff gets weird.
And well, because Tom kind of bows out. He's like, I don't want to get involved in stuff. Which, I mean, we'll get to probably next week or the week after. I can't remember. But you know, like, Tom's only around for like 2 chapters for Rand. I mean, he's doing stuff, but not with Rand.
Right.
And then later, you know, he's with Matt for most of it.
Mm-hmm. And then the girls.
And then the girls. And then Matt again.
Right.
So, I mean, Tom's around, but he's very rarely with Rand.
Yeah, I never really
but he
thought of
does
that,
so much.
Uh-huh.
You know? Like, it's really interesting when you think about the time he actually spends with Rand versus everybody else, you know?
True.
Anyway, I agree. I'm super glad that Tom's back. I just want to leave this here. Quote, Moraine said I was still alive, did she? Is she with you then? Rand shook his head. To his surprise, Tom seemed disappointed. Too bad, in a way. She's a fine woman, even if she is... He left it unsaid. End quote. It was all there from the beginning. We may not have noticed it at the time, but it was all there.
Yeah. Don't at me.
And of course, what Tom is most interested in is getting his harp and flute back.
Right?
End of the world or no end of the world. He has his priorities.
Hey, that was
It's a good flute.
Apparently, there's no other flute really much
And
like
the harp,
it. And
you
the
know.
harp,
Yeah.
Yeah. That ends chapter 24 and 25 of The Great Hunt. Join us next week for chapters 26 and 27, where Rand has a lengthy conversation with Tom, and then Trollocs and fireworks.
That sounds interesting. We hope that you enjoyed this episode of the Wheel of Time Pod-Thru.
We'll see you again next week. Make sure you rate and subscribe to us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. If you could leave us a positive review, it would really help us out. It makes us more visible so people can find us easier. You can tweet us at WhatPodThru or email us at whatpodthru@gmail.com and tell us your thoughts on anything we covered today.
That's WOTPODTHRU@gmail.com. Thanks, everybody, and we hope the wheel weaves you in our direction again soon. The Cairhien That's not right. The Cairhien. Why do I have such a hard time with this word?